Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about using a GM Oracle as part of your sort of D&D, Dungeon Master, Game Master sort of tool set. What the things you sort of use and play, you know, those sort of tables, improvisation aids, those sorts of things. And whether, you know, something like a GM Oracle has a slot somewhere within your own personal tool set. Tell you a little bit about sort of my experience and sort of how I think that maybe adding something like our GM Oracles could be helpful for I think most Dungeon Masters and most Game Masters to kind of take a little bit of the burden off your shoulders, especially on those things that sort of kind of jump out at you and you feel like you have to exert a lot of energy trying to figure out things sort of on the fly. And I think that's because of the nature of how the tool is built. I think really helps to kind of share that burden and kind of shoulder it and kind of take it a little bit off of what the load of what you have to do sort of behind the screen as a Dungeon Master or Game Master. So let me see if this sort of is circumstances that seem somewhat familiar to you, because as I know, it certainly feels familiar to me. So what happens sort of like in a D&D session when a player asks a question you're not prepared for? When you don't know sort of like what to do and you kind of freeze, they ask you a question and you go, I don't... Internally you're just like, I don't know. I don't know. And you're like, I don't even know how to think about answering that will make sense. When you start thinking about, like, especially if you're the sort of Dungeon Master or Game Master that has like a lot of sort of world building in the back, or this is a question that probably the player doesn't know when they're asking, but they're like, this could actually have a pretty significant effect of sort of how the game goes or how the campaign goes, or define something very specific about this adventure or this part of the world or whatever it might be. And you're like, I don't know, and now I have got a lot of pressure on me to either to make some sort of decision one way or the other. And so, right, you just kind of start to freeze. You have like all the eyes on the table on you to answer sort of like a simple question or to respond to whatever that they're sort of trying to communicate, and you're drawing this blank. And so I found that using something like a GM Oracle, which is built for sort of solo TTRPG play, to be sort of a helpful sort of safety net in these circumstances. It's sort of something that allows me to go, because it's particularly built for basically this specific scenario where you as a player are sort of playing by yourself. So I guess that kind of broaches right into the topic. You know, what is, for those who don't know, what is a GM Oracle? So a GM Oracle is it's just sort of the name that's sort of evolved. There's not really sort of a super formal name for it, but I feel like with people who are familiar with sort of oracles, if you start talking about GM Oracle, everybody kind of knows what you're talking about. They might have different experiences based off of the different type of oracles that they've used, but everybody's sort of at least on the same page. If anybody has any sort of brushing familiarity with doing any sort of like solo TTRPG or GM-less sort of TTRPG, they'll be like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. So it's a tool for solo tabletop role-playing games that sort of acts as a stand-in for that missing power-hungry fiend behind a DM screen, right? Those sorts of us that are like, all the control and all my little pieces and all my little toys to play with. So whether you're avoiding a bad D&D group, or you're just struggling to find people with schedules that line up, or people who are interested in playing, and you're like, or you want to try out a new game and nobody else is interested in a new game. I know, especially as a Dungeon Master and some sort of veteran players who play in probably D&D 5e groups, especially with players who have played nothing but D&D 5e, trying to get them to, you know, relax their white knuckle grip sort of on that system and be open to sort of like exploring some other rule systems to kind of see, hey, maybe we could play something that's not the very, very specific niche of D&D fantasy. If we want to play, I don't know, maybe some Hall of Cthulhu, maybe want to do something sci-fi, maybe we want to post-apocalypse, and maybe we just want to be vampires and dress all goth. It's just that, right, there are a lot of other great systems out there, that cyberpunk, all sorts of things that give you the ability to do the thing that you've learned to love, which is playing tabletop RPGs. I mean, like, it doesn't always have to be this very sort of hyper-specific fantasy milieu that is D&D. We can sort of, like, extrapolate that out and, you know, get some different stuff. But that can be hard to sort of, like, sell the group on. So sometimes you kind of sit there either because you can't find the group, or the group doesn't want to try out a different RPG or whatever it is, or you just, maybe you're just like me and you want a little bit more D&D in your life. So you're like, you know, maybe I'll just give this solo thing a try. And that sort of came up, obviously, it really exploded during the pandemic. But even before the pandemic, we saw these people who especially came into 5e, but then weren't able to sort of like find groups or connect with people. And so wanting a way to sort of be a part of the hobby without having to go through, you know, I need 4 warm bodies to show up at the same place at the same time regularly. So it really does do that. So here's sort of like the basics of how it helps. So the GM Oracle kind of helps by confirming, you know, what's happening by the solo player sort of prompting it. You kind of prompt it with yes or no questions. So an example of that would be like, okay, I've walked into this room. Are there any crates my PC can hide behind in this room? That's a yes or no question. You roll the Oracle die. It's going to tell you yes or no. Then you'll be like, okay, so there are crates, and they're specifically large enough for me to hide behind. Good to know. And so it can kind of, through some yes and no questions, it kind of helps you build out the world and give you what is and is not kind of around, and those sorts of things, and kind of pick up. So it's sort of like an extra layer that you lay on top of something that's like the ability check. So something that's on top of the sort of attacks or saves or skill checks sort of thing. So it's a different sort of framework, that just kind of light little framework that kind of sits on top. It's just that little float on the top of it that kind of helps you fill in the blanks of where a DM would be feeding you that information. It also helps you to sort of create and connect sort of locations, creatures, items, and plots. Kind of help you come up with ways to sort of connect what can feel like very disparate elements and kind of build it into sort of a knit of a whole adventure, that with you also kind of being flexible to fill in some of the blanks yourself as a player with sort of those questions. It gives you the ability to sort of create the adventure as you're playing the adventure, which is a very interesting way to do. That's obviously one of its big strengths. So if you have watched my D&D solo RPG, you can see the GM Oracle in action, but also you can kind of see how it does. We run into new NPCs and new locations and stumble into new adventure threads, and then we close off adventure plots as we can connect them. That's sort of tied to our level up, because we're using sort of a storytelling I just lost the word for it. Just kind of, we're not doing XP level up, obviously. The milestone, there we go. Milestone leveling up. So, yeah, we just kind of do it that way. So it's sort of like as we tick off sort of adventure threads, that kind of gives us the sort of player motivation to be like, we want to finish these adventure threads, so that way we can level up. So that's sort of what it does. And then sort of the third thing it does is that it helps you sort of like prompt ideas to provide context for sort of what's happening. And so for that, it's like the manifesto you find in the study is on the subject of, and then you would roll on the random table, which I think I've got here. Let me see if I've got the solo dark one up. So there are a bunch of different ones that just kind of give you tables of like descriptors and verbs and nouns and things like that. I do have it. So this is what we've been using in the dungeon in my own solo playthrough. And these are the Kelsidion's solo dark prompts for the solo version of her game. But basically it gives you 2 D100 lists. You roll on them and you get it. So like I was saying, you find this book in the study and on the subject of defend and isolation. You go, okay, you kind of use your brain. You're like, all right, what does that mean in the context of sort of the adventure that I think is likely? So it's sort of like this incredibly useful aid for solo TTRPG players who need sort of that help. Sort of, they are the train that's moving, and they need that this sort of GM Oracle is the person in the front who's like laying down tracks as fast as you can sort of go down them. So it's a very interesting sort of thing. So it does sort of those three things. It kind of helps you answer the yes or no things to kind of confirm things, helps you sort of create and connect locations, creatures, and items, and plots, and all that stuff together. So everything you come across kind of knits together, and then gives you the sort of like prompt ideas when you kind of hit a roadblock. So as you can see, these are the sort of things that kind of come up as your dungeon master pretty often, right? You're going to have to give a lot of yes or no answers. Basically, you're going to have to, oftentimes your players are trying to find connections between things which may or may not be related, or things you hadn't assumed were related. It can help you there, or gives you the ideas to sort of like prompt context when the players are way off the rails and, you know, they're just kind of coming up with stuff. Or, like I said, if a player pulls or their player character pulls a random book off a shelf and says, "What is this book about?" You can roll on sort of those prompts and be like, "Oh, defend isolation is sort of the sort of weird isolationist manifesto that you found on the shelf." Boom. And then that kind of gives us some context. Also for the person who might have that on their bookshelf, if you need that too. So that kind of gives you this extra little smidge of character detail you can kind of like work into it. So yeah, I mean that's the basics of what a GM Oracle does and what it is. So it's very useful for solo RPG, and I think it can be very useful for dungeon masters as well. It's been sort of useful for me. But you might be thinking sort of like, hey, well, I'm the DM. Why would I want to incorporate a tool that does what I do? Is the AI revolution coming for my DM screen? Yeah, I mean, if they can figure out, trust me, if Wizards of the Coast can figure out a way to mint dungeon masters in a digital form that you pay a monthly subscription for, if they're not working on that already, they're definitely thinking about it. They would love to figure out how to make that work. Because that would make selling D&D to everybody in the world a lot easier if you don't need, 1 out of 3, 4, or 5 friends to be the person who sits behind the screen and everybody gets to play a character. For a lot of groups, that would be probably a boon. They would actually probably really like that. And it's only like those specific people, if you're watching this, you may be one of those specific people who's like, I want to run the game, I want to create the world, I want to do that stuff, and I want to be in charge of that. Or you're the person who's like, I actually prefer playing the dungeon master, game master role a lot more than playing a character. So, there is still like this core, there would still be this core population of people who would want to run games. But yeah, I'm certainly if we got to the point where we could have a good sort of AI dungeon master, you would have to watch out for your DM screen. But this sort of GM Oracle tool is, first of all, not really an AI. I mean, the best that I've seen is that people put together sort of like automatic roll tables online for it with a little bit of coding. But it's still very much sort of up to you to integrate those details. So it's a far cry from AIs taking our jobs as DMs. That's not quite happening yet. So we don't have to worry about it too much. The important thing is that sort of like prep and improv are really difficult for dungeon masters, for every dungeon master to some varying degrees. You might be the sort of person who really enjoys prep. I like prepping, so it's not really that much of a hassle for me. For me, it's about time and making sure that I have the time to do it. And then sort of improv, and I think that comes with experience and sort of your background. So you might be the sort of person who really gets energized by sort of like that rapid fire, like improv kind of stuff. So you probably don't need a lot of help there, but you might want a lot of help sort of prepping things because maybe you're not real good at that. So it can kind of, this tool is very versatile because it'll let you sort of interact with both of those things. It's sort of like a sort of dungeon master personal assistant in that way. It's going to help wherever you need it, and only when you pull it out and use it. So if you don't need it or you don't like what it gives you, you just ignore the results of it and come up with something better or roll again. That's very often what I do, is that I rolled something and go, I don't know what that is, so pick the dice back up and re-roll them and see if I come up with something better that makes a little bit more sense for this situation. So, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like your personal assistant. It isn't really that much different than sort of any other sort of random table you might roll on that might be already part of your sort of Dungeon Master or Game Master tool set. You just ignore the results that you don't like. You maybe grab 2 dice and roll twice on the table and sort of slam them together. That's one of my favorite things to do. I think it's something I intuited, but it is something that Mike Shea over at Sly Flourish brought up a few months ago, at least at the time of recording this. We were talking about that's his preferred way to use tables, and of course, it's one of those things like, as you get more experience as a Dungeon Master or Game Master, or just a player in general, and you're like, well, yeah, I roll twice on tables all the time, and just take whichever result I like, or push those results together. It's like, but that's sort of something I've sort of intuited either by watching other people or playing with other people, or just myself wanting more sort of finite options with a larger breadth of scope by doing that, because it kind of basically doubles the results of your table. But sorry, it's exponentially more results on your table, more than double. But it does give you sort of this idea. So I was like, but nobody, I don't think I've ever read that anywhere where it's like, hey, roll twice on this table and combine them, like in an official source. Like, that's just something I've intuited over the time. So it works in that way. So if you already use random tables for sort of like your prep and for your for sort of improving as you play, adding a GM Oracle to that is only going to help you, and it's going to be really familiar once you get sort of like into the zone of being alright, they've asked me a question I don't know, here's the table I might roll on for that, roll those dice, I like this result, I don't like that result, I'm going to do something else instead. Very simple once you sort of get into the flow. Yeah, having actual tables has been a game changer for speeding up improv creativity. Yeah, and stories that organically flow. Yeah, it's really helpful. You are absolutely correct. Yeah, it's extremely helpful for that. Instead of trying to rack your brain, it's more about sort of like, how can we kind of keep it moving, keep it going quickly. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's... Let me give you sort of like an example. I feel like it's sort of every time that I'm prepping, there's always some sort of like unexpected question that comes up for me. It's often me sort of like going through a dungeon, and I've done about half of it, and then realize I haven't considered something, and I'm not sure what that means for my prep. This was sort of like a little blind spot that I didn't think about. I'm like, all right, what does that mean for my prep? So sometimes, grab the dice, grab the oracle, and be like, okay, yes or no, what does this mean? How can I change that? Will this affect other parts of my dungeon? Yes or no? What does that mean? Some ideation, give me some prompts for how that changes this room. Okay, it does this and this instead. So I found that super useful, because instead of me trying to sit down and trying to unravel sort of like a half-made jigsaw puzzle in my prep, I can just start asking questions, which allows me to sort of get moving quickly on making those adjustments and kind of get me back into finishing off the prep that I need to do. And at the table, I don't know about you guys, but certainly as a Dungeon Master, players ask me off-the-wall questions about the world and the adventure I certainly don't have a prepped answer for. I mean, I feel like I do that as a player to DMs all the time. Even this comes down to the very simple question of, hey, what's your name? I'm asking an NPC a name, and you're like, I didn't give the shopkeeper a name. Why are you asking me the shopkeeper's name? Are you going to come back and ask him? Are you going to make this a recurring NPC? The shopkeeper who sells, like, rope and stuff? You're going to come back. You're going to come talk to this guy again. You want to have long, exploratory character backstory conversations with the shopkeeper. No. No, you don't. But it is one of those things, sometimes you get asked something off the wall. And that's a very simple example where the oracle's actually probably not very useful unless your oracle has a built-in names table. But it is the sort of thing that you would keep a names table for, so why don't you keep a GM oracle that allow you to better address some of those sort of questions that don't need a specific this answer kind of thing. Yeah, Mike does talk about, Mike Shea over at Slifelers talks about that prep to improv. Yeah, exactly. Bunch of good oracles, situation stuff for how far enemies are, their alertness, what activity they might be doing. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff that actually ends up in my little, well, I just turned it upside down. My little DM binder that I have, where it's like, hey, get random questions and just start answering them. Oh yeah, but you have like sort of on the phone app. Oh, that's cool. That's cool using a phone app for it. I hadn't thought about that. When you just kind of hit the button, it kind of gives you a bullet point of list of things to roll off of. That's a very cool idea. I like that. Might have to check that out. I usually don't use devices at the table. I'm an old stuck in the mud kind of guy. I just like rolling the dice and oftentimes working with paper because I'm just an old codger like that. So I think, right, answering the questions that you're not expecting, for the situations where you don't have an immediate off-the-cuff answer, you're like, yes, I know exactly what the answer to that is, or you don't, especially for me, I don't have a strong inclination one way or the other. I stop sort of like worrying about it and sort of trust in the random factor. And I'm just gonna let the dice take the wheel and kind of decide for me, even sometimes when I do have a strong like inclination. It's like, ooh, I do want this to happen, but that's great with the GM Oracle, because it's like, I don't want to just necessarily make that by DM Fiat. So I might use the GM Oracle style thing where I roll the D20 and I add a modifier to it, and that's going to tell me yes or no. It's like, is this a thing? This is the thing that I think will happen, and I think that's likely to happen. Let me roll a die to confirm that, rather than me just manifesting that. It's a little bit of a difference. Sometimes that's a sort of a very grayish, blurry line, I feel like, when it comes to as DM being like, oh, well, they've done something, so I'm going to completely change the adventure, or something like that. It's sometimes that's, to me, it gets a little close to where, you know, you start things that the DM's going to kind of harangued for, whether that's sort of like changing the hit point totals of monsters on the fly, or augmenting damage, fudging die rolls, that sort of stuff. So that kind of falls into that same sort of grayish, mucky area about what is and is not maybe the right way to play TTRPGs and run games. So that kind of falls in the same place with me. So it's like, if I don't feel very immediately comfortable to be like, yes, this is what's happening, this is the way this is going to go, I might leave that up to chance and give myself some sort of modifiers on that roll. It's like, if I think it's very likely, I'm going to give myself a +5 on that. Do the roll to confirm yes or no. It's very simple, and then that kind of takes a little bit of the burden off of me as a dungeon master, because then I don't, which maybe is a little bit of like removal of my own personal guilt. Is like, if they decide to waltz that way into, who knows, maybe a TPK, be like, well, hey, world's tough like that, I guess. Sorry. Usually I try to telegraph plenty of danger if that happens to be the case. It's like, I think it's likely that there is a sleeping dragon down here. I'm going to telegraph you lots of warnings that there's a big sleeping dragon down here, and if you bust through, drive headfirst through all those warning signs, then you end up in a room with dragon, and you're in a room with a dragon. Good luck. Oh, my stuff is with actual DMing. You can use for collab or improv with the players instead of just the tedium that slows things way down before in the realm of running. But yeah, that is useful. Yeah, sometimes you do get a lot of advice or tools that sometimes feels a little bit more like trying to construct a very set in stone, like you said, book-like kind of narrative, and that's not super useful at the table all the time. You just kind of have to roll with it, and kind of have to be really flexible with it, because you have a whole, ideally you have probably 4 other people who are also trying to charge forward with their own story in mind. So, yeah, a room with a dragon in early levels equals social encounter, yeah, or it's some sort of it's some sort of thing it's an overwhelming force. It's like the earth falling out from under you. It's like it's a massive hazard that will kill you. It's basically a natural disaster at that level. If you're fighting a dragon at early levels, you're basically dealing with a natural disaster, and you can't kill natural disasters. Let's see. Situation I don't know. Looking at my notes, even when I do have a strong inclination, yeah. Oh yeah, and then I just gave myself an example. So you might ask, has my PC encountered the lizard folk before? Do I know anything about them? If you ask me that as DM, and unless I have a very good idea of who your character is and where they're from, I'm gonna be like, I don't know. Let's roll for it. Let's see if you do or not. Well, you grew up in a marshy area, so it's actually probably somewhat likely you've encountered lizard folk. I'll give you a +3 to the roll, and then we'll just roll a basic. Sometimes we mash it up, we change the name of it. Sometimes we call it like a luck roll. Sometimes as a DM, there's different things you can see with sort of, you're a big celebrity, dungeon masters like Mercer, Perkins, Brendan Lee Mulligan. You can see all of them use, and many others use like a luck roll or something like that, where somebody asks them a question, they just pick up a d20 and roll it. That is exactly what they're doing, right? They're doing that luck roll. Or some other, maybe more noodly type of oracle roll, but it's probably just a luck roll. It's like, if you roll 11 or better, the answer's yes. Because you've asked me something I have no idea what the answer is, and I don't really want to waste a lot of brain power thinking about that, so, because I don't think it's going to be particularly important, so we're just going to roll for it and see what it does. So that is sort of the power of a GM Oracle as a tool for us as Dungeon Masters, is it sort of reduces the pressure on your brain for being the only resource for coming up with ideas. So it kind of gives us a lot of things. It feels, like I said, it feels the same role as what it does in different random tables. One is it kind of gives you this more focused way to sort of encourage improvisation to answer questions for you, whether that's while you're prepping by yourself or at the table playing with people. It can work for both situations. Anytime that you find yourself in a kind of moment, that's when I'm like, all right, pick up some dice and roll them. What do these tell me? Let me get to keep moving, keep my feet moving, sort of. Whether that's in prep or running the game, it's like, don't let me get stuck, because I've got to finish prepping, number one, and then number two, if I'm at the table, don't let me get stuck, because I am keeping the game from going if I do that. So I want to keep it kind of, going. Keep it moving along, trucking. So it removes that sort of heavy demand off of you when you're prepping for a session or improvising at the table. One of the probably the biggest strengths that I've found of sort of a GM Oracle is that it's not my brain. Specifically, it's not my brain. So our brains kind of only have so many ideas, and it doesn't take too long, especially as Dungeon Master or Game Master, before you start to kind of use the same ideas over and over again. It's one of the reasons I kind of like the Oracle for prepping. So it can be difficult to kind of see that as a Dungeon Master, but if you've been a player for a while with the same Dungeon Master, especially one who runs homebrew stuff, you'll notice a DM tends to run very similar scenarios to ones you've played previously, or they have the same. Every DM has their certain style of play, but even the premises of those adventures can start to be the same. So it can be helpful. I found it helpful to use a GM Oracle specifically because it kind of pushes me out of that sort of rut where I'm kind of doing the same things over and over again. It's like, okay, this is another adventure where they go into a cave and find a thing and bring it back. Okay, so I've run that adventure I don't know how many times, so let's roll some dice and maybe see if there's something different about the situation, or the situation is completely different in and of itself. Maybe it's not a simple go fetch quest, maybe it's something else. And so it can be difficult to see that when you're the one who's like in it, because you're focused on the prep, not necessarily standing outside scrutinizing the prep that you're doing while you're doing it. That's sort of an extra it's a little bit too removed from the process that you are in the moment while you're doing it. So the GM Oracle is very useful as sort of an external tool that's built to answer questions, particularly not how you might default to answering that question. And by doing that, it helps you sort of create new ideas you might otherwise not come up with, and help keep your sort of adventures fresh as a dungeon master. Kind of keep you from, like I said, kind of having maybe, you know, half a dozen to a dozen types of adventures that you normally run, and now have this tool that's like, yeah, but you can't do it like this, and then throws all these modifiers and monkey wrenches sort of into the system, so every time it's different enough that you enjoy it as a dungeon master, and your players are not going to be like, oh, we've done this adventure 3 times before, we know what to do here. So it kind of changes things up, kind of keeps it, try to keep it fresh, try to keep it different, try to keep it engaging and interesting for yourself as the person who's running the game, and obviously your players who are playing the game. You actually had players run into a lich in a marsh last session. You decided that they disguised themselves as traveling magic salesmen. Inscribed to Pathfinder 2 weapon rune. And oh, that's cool. So that was a cool little intro. It's fun to kind of throw a high level monster at super low level characters just to see what they're going to do with it. From both sides, I guess from both sides of that engagement, because you have to think when you have somebody like a lich who's just walking around, that everybody they run into, everybody they talk to is at such sort of a massive gap of power level below them that they probably just don't walk around just like blasting people, but they also probably don't suffer fools very well either. So now a hag and a lich are in a deadly bad marriage rivalry in that marsh, and you're gonna rope the players into it later. But that sounds fun. That sounds like an interesting little game. They have two very powerful villainous monsters, typically villainous monsters, in this one concentrated area. That's a very fun thing to sort of maybe explore out. That sounds like a fun game. Very cool. Alright, so how do you actually sort of incorporate the GM Oracle sort of into your DM toolset? So the GM Oracles come in like a ton of different forms. There's probably hundreds of them now, if not more than that. But I know there's plenty. I've looked at plenty. And they kind of come with varying complexity to your sort of specific tastes for how you are. My players are very familiar with 2 phrases I use very often. Is I usually like roll a flat d20 and tell me what you get. And the other one is I'll usually pick up a die and sort of hold it up in front of them and be like, high or low? Which number do you want? So that's, for me, it's sort of like distilled a GM Oracle down to its absolute essence, which is basically sometimes referred to as a luck roll, or you just sort of often, I'm going to roll a flat d20 and... Or if it depends on the situation, I might have them roll the flat d20 and be like, I have a number that I need answered, and I want you to roll the die because I want you to be responsible for the answer that I give you. And I call on the player to usually make that roll for me, and sometimes I tell them what it is beforehand, sometimes I don't. Often I don't until they've rolled it. I find it's a very fun way to sort of like keep players engaged, especially when they're not the center of the focus at the moment. So sometimes, let's say that you have 2 or 3 of the characters off doing one thing, and then you have that one character or 2 characters that are sort of off doing their own thing. The party's kind of split up or something, and you have these 3 that are, having a conversation or something like that. Maybe they're talking to an NPC, and they've asked me that question, I'm in that situation. I'll look at one of these 2 other people that are on the other side of the table and be like, hey, will you roll me a flat d20 and tell me what you get? And so that way it kind of helps to keep them engaged a little bit, even in scenes where their player characters aren't present, which can be really helpful to just kind of be like, hey, just like stay engaged, because I'm also going to need your help. You also have a role in this scene, potentially. Sometimes they roll low, and in the player's brain, low means bad. But as the DM, I know usually in that circumstance I'm asking a yes or no question, and no might actually be a more beneficial result for them. So they, and I don't know, it keeps them a little bit off foot because they kind of make the assumption that low rolls are bad, but low rolls just mean no if I'm asking a question. So it could be like, is there a dragon down here? They're like, oh, I rolled a 2. Dang, really failed that one. I'm like, okay, well the answer's no, so there's not a dragon down here. You're lucky. So it's slightly different. But it is fun to sort of like put them in that situation, kind of give them this idea that that the players themselves are culpable for what happens, but also not giving them the stakes in which they understand the decisions they make sometimes, just to kind of keep them on edge, and then at the same time be like, oh, you know, you did, this is, you know, you rolled for it, or not know that a low roll has just saved them from probably a deadly encounter. So they don't really know, but it's nice to kind of keep them involved, but have them kind of puzzling about it at the same time. It's a lot of fun. I'd say try it out. I like it. It involves the characters, or the players, in a way that they're not used to necessarily integrating with the game. What else do we want to say about that? Oh yeah, in other circumstances, I'll ask a player to choose high or low, and then I roll a die. And same thing, usually high is good, usually low is bad, but not always. And if they're choosing which direction it kind of goes in, they also don't know the odds sometimes. So sometimes it's 50-50 odds. If they're like, I choose low numbers and I roll a 9, and I roll a 9, I'm like, well, that's a low number, so that's beneficial. Whatever the beneficial aspect of that is beneficial to you, because you rolled on the low side. But it's not always 50-50. Sometimes I'll do like an 80-20 split, so I'm like, oh, well, you need to get a, say you want it high, you're like, alright, well, you still need to roll a 17 or better. So they might be like, I chose high, I rolled 16, they're like, yes. And I'm like, well, this happens instead. They're like, but I rolled a 16. Oh, you did roll a 16. But you don't know what the DC is for that sometimes. So, yeah, it depends. So that gives you a different way to sort of like modify things, so it's not just always a 50-50 chance. You use those modifiers to set things off. So it's a little bit different. And I like those sorts of rolls because they sort of draw the entire table's attention in on a single die roll, even if it's for a somewhat inconsequential roll. Like, do I know anything about lizard folk? Alright, high or low, which one do you want? Roll the die. Everybody's like, oh, that's 16, that's high. And it's like, okay, yes, you do know something about lizard folk, and then give them sort of that information. And they're like, but in the overall scheme of things, was that like an adventure-breaking answer? Did they get some sort of super worthwhile information? Probably. I mean, this is a hypothetical adventure, but probably not. But everybody's attention at least gets drawn in when you sort of like try to pull that focus on a specific die roll. It helps to kind of keep everybody engaged at the table, which is, you know, that's a hard thing to learn, and a hard thing to perform in practice as Dungeon Master or Game Master, is to basically be able to sort of hold the attention of a table. It's very difficult to do. I'm not sure that I have any specific tips about it, other than sort of what kind of comes through other things as I talk about it. Yeah, I don't know if I have any specific advice about that, though. Yeah, then make them the ones responsible for the result. Yeah, they don't know that. They don't need to know. This is your fault that these bad things are happening to you. They're your die rolls. You could always just roll higher. It could always be. The biggest thing for you is the blank sheet of paper paralysis. Yeah, then the carte blanche moment. That's what I needed oracles to help with in the moment during play. Yeah, anytime that your brain kind of goes, like, disconnects and you kind of go, and you're like, I have no freaking idea. Yeah, being put on the spot with a crazy pressure without any sort of, like, improv crutches. So yeah, it's very easy to, like, it's just like you said, getting off the blank page. That's where I love it for prep, and I'm like, I don't know what should be in this room. Let me grab some dice and roll it. That makes sense to me. I don't know what this adventure is about. I've got a prep adventure for this coming session. Right now, we've been in one of my groups. We've been going through. We've had a lot of people sort of like in and out. You know, it's getting that time of year with holidays coming up and stuff. People are traveling and stuff. and we're kind of getting to that point where we're not being really able to do our consistent game right now, our campaign. So everybody's kind of taking turns, kind of running one-shots and things like that, just to kind of keep things fresh. And so when I'm prepping a one-shot, I'm like, I don't know what to make a one-shot about. I didn't really have a great idea. Let me start grabbing some dice and see if I come up with something. Let me grab some random tables with the Oracle, and I actually have a document that's just like a list. I think it's a 1d10. It's a roll table for coming up with adventures. So it's not like D10 different types of adventures. It's like, here are 10 different sources of places I can go to that will help me make an adventure very quickly. That will get me a premise for an adventure. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to open up the Tome of Adventure Design, or hey, I'm going to use my Questomatic thing that I have. I'm going to grab the Adventurer's Companion from Slice and Flourish and pull that open. Yeah, it's just... it tells me which source to look in to build the next adventure. And I think that also helps. At least it helps me to, like I said, trying to deal with that sense that all my adventures sort of approach singularity after a time, that I only have like so many different ironclad adventures is sort of I only have like that sort of finite types of adventures under my belt that I can probably consistently just pull off the top of my brain. So it's helpful to be like, and here are 10 other sources that will give me hundreds of different types of adventures. So I can do it that way. Automating all those rollers is useful. Yeah, I think it depends on... Yeah, I think a lot of people fall into that camp where they want the automated rolling of it. For me, I actually kind of enjoy the dice aspect of it, so it's not too big of... Is it slower? For sure. But there is something, I don't know. It's more like a tactile thing, I think. It's just, I enjoy the process of it. It's sort of like ordering a coffee versus sort of brewing a coffee by yourself. Like with a pour over or whatever, Chemex or whatever you're using. It's sort of different. It's like part of the process is important in that. I don't know. I don't know if that's a mindfulness thing. Who knows? That's assigning a lot of import to something that I think is just me liking to roll math rocks. I think I just like to roll math rocks. So any excuse to sort of pick them up while I'm even just prepping it or be like, ha, dice, is always fun for me. So I think that's probably why I do it. But that might just be a me thing. Maybe that's not a for everybody kind of thing. Let's see, anything else? Oh, I have a truncated version of my own sort of custom 1d20 GM Oracle in my DM binder. It's right here. It's right on the first freaking page. This is this is sort of GM Oracle Lite. I actually don't use this very much because I've internalized it all so entirely that I don't need to look at it. But yeah, I mean the sort of idea is that, you know, that's GM Oracle Lite. It never fills you up, never lets you down. All the flavor of a, you know, full calorie GM Oracle, just in its light version. Perfect for everybody. Give it a try today. So yeah, so I have a truncated version of that. I've also, if you want to see more about the GM binder, I have a video of that on the channel, so check that out, and I can just kind of step through it and kind of talk about everything that's in there. So it's fun if you're looking for the sort of things that are helpful. And I kind of talk about some of the things that I made in that binder, and some of the things that I don't use that more, or things that I wish I had added, that or things I still need to add to it, need to swap out. I think that's very useful. That it's a living document. A GM binder is like a living document. It's never really done, because you're always sort of tweaking it, ideally, so it has the most useful things for you at any time. But what else was I going to say? I think that was it. Did I miss something else? I don't think so. The GM Binders video is when you subscribe. Well, thank you for subscribing, obviously. But yeah, math rocks are so fun. That's how I'm currently teaching a 3-year-old numbers. Yeah, no, dice are great for that. I think D&D and other TTRPGs can be a fantastic learning tool for a lot of things. Just because of how they're set up and how they function. It certainly sharpens up your basic math skills pretty easily. Let's see. Oh, and I'm gonna bring up the full GM. We talked about sort of the lesser, our GM binder light, but let me bring up the full-bodied, long-lasting flavor version of the GM Oracle. And I'll actually bring this up. Let me swap over to the workspace, but I gotta change my window capture. Which one do I want? That's it. There we go. There we go. So now you guys can see what I'm looking at. This is the full 1d20 GM Oracle that I use. This is what I use for my solo RPG series, so if you want to see it in use and see how that works, you just gotta... There's a whole playlist. We're up to, what, 42 sessions now? We just got some crazy news out of there, and we're finally leaving the dungeon at that point, so where we go from here, I mean, we got to get the rest of that thing decoded, but it's been exciting. And that dungeon took a lot longer, and we still didn't technically finish it, but we got everything we need out of it. So there's 5-ish pages here, right? I think kind of bumps down here. I don't need most of this. Most of this is sort of just blanket knowledge about how to use it, because I've given it to some friends and stuff, just so they can use it if they are so inclined. But yeah, this is the full-bodied one that I use for my solo RPG stuff. So it's fun. Jump in, check it out if you want to. If you kind of want to see it, how it is, and then we'll zoom in and we'll kind of talk about the specifics of this, so you guys can get an idea of sort of how it works. You're stealing all these tables later. Yeah, that's sort of what they're for. Where's the art from? Oh, in the background. I'm not sure. I think I was Dodo Head, and I have probably not given that art recognition. I think I just nailed it I just grabbed it from somewhere on the internet, probably a Google image search. Probably for like 16-bit fantasy castle or something like that. Something like that. That's where it's from. So if you just search for that, you can probably find it. I might have said like wallpaper or something like that. Who knows? Let's go ahead and look at this full-bodied size. There we go. So that way you can fully see it. So yeah, you just use a simple 1d20 Oracle. Very simple. When it's 50-50, 11 plus is the answer is yes for a yes or no question. 10 or less, the answer is no. I have a +3 modifier, +3 or -3 if I think it's a likely or unlikely result, and then that goes up to a ± if I think it's a very likely or unlikely result. So yeah, it's pretty simple. So if you roll a d20, if you roll a natural 20, you get yes, and an edge. This could be an edge or a hindrance depending on sort of how you frame the question, but I just left it in as edge. So it kind of gives you, there's d10 that you roll on for that, so the answer is yes plus some extra, or no plus some extra. Same thing with the natural 1. And then 12 through 19, answer is yes, just a flat yes. So one of the things that I changed is one of the reasons that I came up with my own specific version is because there are a lot of other ones that have a lot more complicated results, and I know personally for me, when I played Dungeon World with its 2d6 system, one of the things that really bothered me about that system is that it's very rare that the answer is just yes or just no. Which I realized put me in a weird position as a player, because it was informing the way that I played the game. And the way that I was playing the game was that I only ever wanted to roll on things my character was good at, because there was a likelihood that I would succeed. But the problem is that the scale of how that 2d6 table works with Dungeon World and anything that's powered by the apocalypse is that most of the time, whenever you make a roll, something bad is going to happen to you. There's going to be some detriment to whatever you're rolling. Even if you succeed, it's usually you get success with something bad that happens to you, or puts you in more danger or something like that. And I felt like it put me in a position where I was like, I often didn't want to roll dice, or it often would come up to sort of my character's turn, and there's a game master, wouldn't be, I can't remember what they call it in Dungeon World, look at me and be like, what do you want to do? And I was like, there are so many times that I just want to be like, I don't want to do anything, because everything's going to hurt me, and I can't do the one good thing I'm at. So like the one good thing my character could do doesn't really apply to this situation, and I feel like if I roll anything, it's just going to be detrimental to me or my companion, so I don't want to do anything. And I was like, that to me was like, that doesn't feel like a good resolution system if it makes me not want to engage with the resolution system. So I was like, I don't want that in my Oracle. And a lot of the Oracle tables work like that, where it's very rare that you just get a flat yes or a flat no. So I built my own table where it's like, I want more yeses or no. Sometimes I just want to know a yes or no question. And so I feel more comfortable using the GM Oracle role when I'm like, this won't spill out into its own thing when I'm just trying to answer a very simple yes or no question. Are there crates in this room for me to hide behind? The answer is no. And something terrible happens to you. How are these things related? So I'm trying to reduce a little bit of that. Hey, how are you doing? I see you. Yeah, a lot of your tables at the moment are from Plight. Oh, I'm not really familiar with Plight. I'll have to check that out. I'm guessing that Plight is an OSR-ish clone. It has that name, like Cairn or something like that. That very simple white hack. It's very simple kind of naming structure. So I assume it's that. Or Spire. Though Spire, I don't think it's technically OSR. But it's sort of in that same kind of gritty, rough and tumble simple systems. So if you roll a natural 20 or a natural 1, you get the yes or no plus an edge or hindrance, depending on what makes sense for that result. 12 through 19 is yes. 2 through 9 is no. 10 is no plus some sort of interrupted scene. 11 is yes plus some sort of interrupted scene. So this is our yes, and things are about to get really weird. So these are the things, these 10 and 11 results are the things that I didn't like about things like systems like Dungeon World. These sometimes called narrative systems, where they're like, where it's like, we'll never give you just a yes or no answer. And I'm like, sometimes I really want, most of the time I want just a yes or no answer. I don't want things to become more complicated. I'm trying not to turn every scene into just a plate of spaghetti that I'm trying to unravel, just because I'm trying to figure out what's in the scene. So I bumped this down, so there's only 10% chances there's going to be an interrupted scene with my system, with this little oracle that I built. And they're very, very simple. It's just the interrupted scene is like, the answer is yes to this, but then something else interjects it. Somebody else, in a very sort of stage play kind of way, somebody else walks on stage and something else happens that sort of interrupts what you're doing. So it's cool. It kind of adds that sort of randomness, or getting interrupted in the middle of what could be a very important scene because you just happen to roll weirdly. So for edges and hindrances, I have a D10 table. It's very simple. Bring current plot thread to a climax. So that means you just find your current plot threads. You'll have a list of them. That's how it works. And you grab one and be like, or you roll for which one and be like, this one is coming to a head right now. What does that mean? Who knows? If it doesn't make sense, as with anything with the GM Oracle, if it doesn't make sense, then you don't use it. If you can't figure out how that happens, then don't worry about it. So that's one, is bring a current plot thread to an end, to a climax. The second is make a new plot thread, something 100 new that you learned from this sort of interaction or space. 3 is some existing faction or NPC enters or exits the scene. So if you have multiple that are already in there, they can leave the scene. Which might mean that they huff off, right? If it's a hindrance and you're having a tense negotiation, they might lose their cool and leave the room, and you're like, well, that's the end of the scene then. I guess I don't get to talk to them anymore. And maybe that's a hindrance for talking to them in the future. That's how the edges or hindrances kind of work. The same thing could go is like, if that was supposed to be an edge, something that was supposed to be beneficial for you with that same result, you could be like, well, their top advisor gets personally upset or gets drawn away to deal with a different issue, and now you have advantage of dealing with this person because now you kind of have a diplomatic power play kind of going on where you can kind of bully the table a little bit. So that might give you some advantage on some rolls. in that sort of diplomatic sort of sense. Yeah, you can always ignore the words after the yes or no. Yeah, you don't ever have to follow them. There are plenty of times where I'll roll like a 10 or 11 right at the beginning of the session and be like, I don't want to do an interrupt scene. I'm in the very first scene. Or I just got done with an interrupt scene. Or I'm in an interrupt scene right now and I don't want to interrupt my interrupt scene. So it is definitely something you can always, at any point you roll, you're not beholden to the rolls at any point. You can roll it and be like, actually, I just don't like that. And I'm going to re-roll it. Yeah, oracles are more like guidelines. That is correct. You are correct. So you have bring current plot to a climax, new plot thread, existing faction NPC enters or exits, a new faction or NPC enters. That means that somebody we haven't met before enters the scene. Some sort of revelation that alters the current plot thread, so we learn something new, some sort of secret information we didn't know about before that generally makes things worse, but could make things better. It can always be an edge, so that might make things better, but most of the time, usually that's worse. You can trade a resource to gain an edge or avoid a hindrance. So you come up with something that's very specific that you can trade some sort of resource, whether that's a spell slot that you have, they can do, you have some points of gear or something like that that you can use. Any of sort of those classic abilities. To do that stuff. Absolutely. NPC acts against their best interest. So you have, and that could be, that might be good for you. So let's say, here's an example from the recent solo game that I did where we had found that Dwarven Rye whiskey that was very good stuff. And Imbar went over there and decided to, they had a little tasting session of the dwarven whiskey we found in the dungeon. And it's like, if I had an NPC act against their best interest, if I had for whatever reason rolled an oracle roll about that and ended up with some sort of hindrance, it might be that it could have been, I could interpret that as Imbar just gets hammered in the middle of this dungeon, like just doesn't know the proof of the alcohol and ends up drinking way too much, and now is absolutely just like a mess. Like just a slob all over this dungeon. It's like, that would be very bad, and I don't want that. So, but that is one of the ways I could rule that, and I probably would, just because I'm a little bit of a masochist in that way, I guess. And 8, gain or lose a resource, very simple. You either find something here, or somebody gives you a gift, or something like that, or you lose a resource. I think that's one of the ways that we got, actually, Akari, Liaden's bow. I believe we actually rolled for that, and it was gain a resource, and he gifted us that bow as sort of his family heirloom bow, as sort of like a promise that we could call in a favor basically later, which we have. So thanks for that. Yeah. It doesn't exist until we say it. Absolutely right. Yeah, if I don't say it out loud, it's not real. Do I have a way to watch me actually game? Yeah, I have the solo RPG series. So if you check the channel, there's a playlist. We've got about 42 sessions of the solo RPGs. You can watch me use these tables and go through it myself. We've just about to get out of a dungeon right now. Our first actual dungeon, I think, first real dungeon of the campaign. We're just about to exit it, so we've got to make a bunch of wandering monster checks as we try to stealth and/or sprint our way out of the dungeon. Solo game tables for GMing multiplayer games is got here. Yeah, 42 sessions. Geez, let's go. Yeah, it's been a wild ride. It's been interesting. Yeah. The solo game tables for GMing multiplayer games it's a very fun, useful thing. It takes a lot of your sort of a lot of the sort of pressure, at least it has for me. It kind of takes that pressure off you, and you kind of breathe a little bit easier. So those are the edges or hindrances. And then I have down here at the bottom, it's like, hey, sorry, you can't see all the way at the bottom. Here we go. All the way at the bottom. I literally have a thing. I'm just going to cut places, actually. It says, hey, you draw on a blank. Your next oracle roll is either at advantage or disadvantage instead. Like, I don't know what this means. I don't know what this hindrance is. next time I roll a GM Oracle roll, I'm going to do it at disadvantage, so it's more likely to be a no. Or whatever is more likely to be detrimental to me. So I guess maybe that's a fit. I'm just going to say disadvantage. You roll it at disadvantage. You know, you're smart cookies. You understand how to interpret that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try to work into every edge case here. And then we have our 1d20 plot twists or reveals. This is one of the ones that I use for, like, when we have this, like, number 5, revelation that alters the current plot thread. So there's another little thing, or just random stuff we can find out about stuff. It's just a very, very, very simple table. Number 1, can't be resolved by fighting, whatever this issue is. Sorry, combat's out the window. We're going to have to come up with some reason you can't use combat for this. 2, it's only part of a larger plot. Hey, what do you know? There's something else going on here. You're treating a symptom, not the problem. Some sort of thing where to save one, we must sacrifice one. So we have to, it's going to put us in a very sort of moral dilemma. A trolley problem kind of thing. NPC has a hidden identity. So there's somebody in here who is masquerading, who are not who they say they are. Patron and villain inversion. So the guy we're being told is the bad guy isn't actually the bad guy. And the person who we think is our patron, who is telling us to go fight the bad guy, is the actual bad guy. 6 requires personal sacrifice. So the PC or PCs are going to have to actually give something up for this. It's going to require something from them. A PC or NPC is integral to the plot, right? Same sort of thing would be like, hey, this actually has something to do specifically with you, PC. This is about you for some reason. Or specifically about this random NPC you know, that they are tied to this. Maybe they show up, which means they're probably going to show up in the adventure if they're not there already. You must protect an area or bystanders. Yeah, that you're trying to stop collateral damage as well. Kind of gives you some extra things to worry about, sort of like during a fight, during combats and things like that. Quid pro quo. When you little, I scratch your back, you scratch my back kind of situation. So they're going to have to do a little bit of that in the adventure. They're going to have to schmooze with somebody and get them on their side, or do a favor for them that they're probably not going to want to do. Make it something they're really not going to want to do. So they have to make a tough decision about it. Only doable by a specific who, when, where, or how. So there's a specific thing, like this is well, you gotta kill the vampire with a stake kind of thing. You've got a Medusa Gorgon situation where they're gonna turn you to stone. So the easiest way to deal with that is to turn them to stone, or... This is basically telling you that this is some sort of what used to be called, I guess they're still called that, gotcha monsters. Which are like monsters that have very specific things, like you're going to fight a werewolf. Well, if you don't have silver on you and you don't have magic weapons, that's going to be a real bad time. So you really need silver or magic with you, and in one of the campaigns I'm playing with, we just stumbled into a wereshark. And our barbarian does not have a magic weapon. So our barbarian was absolutely useless in that fight. And she was not happy about it. The player character, the player's fine. The player character was very upset about it. But strangely enough, my ranger has a magic item and a magic weapon, and our warlock has a magic weapon. So actually probably not as terrible as that combat could have gone. And nobody got contracted lycanthropy, or whatever the shark version of lycanthropy is. I don't know what that is. I don't know what is lichen is. It's not Latin. I don't know the source. I'm not gonna worry about that. I'm not gonna run down that little rabbit trail. So fight the previous heroes. They're brainwash dominated or undead. That's always a fun one. I did that one for a one shot not that long ago, where I was like, oh, now you have to fight the undead, worm infested, undead heroes that were in here before. So they had their own little separate fights for different types of undead heroes, which is fun. A rival, adventurer, patron, or villain. So now you've got a rivalry, somebody who's also trying to accomplish the same things your player characters are trying to accomplish. Enemy or rival has to be turned into a temporary ally. That's always a fun one, having to team up with the bad guy, the guy you don't like. Or better to be a rival. You secretly knew who the villain was the whole time. Very Scooby-Doo. It's like, oh, the person who was pulling the strings of all this was all these machinations was me the whole time, sort of thing. Stripped of normal abilities gear. So they're prisoners, they've been polymorphed, they've been resized. We ran I played in a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids kind of game once, which was fun. Adventure, where we were all tiny, running around. I think Questing Beasts has an adventure that's kind of like that. A popular one, I think. But rather than the adventurers are downsized, they're just running around the giant's house. So it's a little bit different, but still fun. Number 16, NPC Betrayal. The classic NPC Betrayal. That's only going to happen 5% of the time that you roll on this table. What you don't want to do as a Dungeon Master or Game Master is overuse the NPC Betrayal thing. Because then they won't trust anybody, and you need them to trust your NPCs most of the time. Or else it makes your life very difficult as a Dungeon Master if they will never listen to people in the world. They never trust people in the world. Same thing, party is set up as a patsy or scapegoat. For whatever the villain kind of sets them up to take the fall, kind of does like an entrapment and puts them in the wrong place at the wrong time, and with a bunch of evidence around them that makes them look guilty. Yep, do that. Unintentional success consequences. So there's some sort of unintended consequence from your success. Yay! We stopped the magma that was being flowed into the Dwergar's Undermountain Forge that was, helping them prepare to wage war on the surface world. We stopped that magma flow. We did it, guys! Oh no, the volcano's erupting because there's no place for that magma to go now. Crap. So that's that sort of situation where it's like, oh, you did the right thing, but sometimes there was unintended consequences of doing the right thing. It's not the true source of the issue. Similarly, you walk into a place and you're like, oh, this will solve the problem. You go and do that thing, and that ends up not solving the problem. And then number 20 is a classic villain deputy switcheroo. So I like to run adventures where you have a villain who also has like a right-hand man kind of guy, like a lieutenant, a deputy. And then do the switcheroo where it's actually like, the deputy was actually the one pulling the strings the whole time. Just this oath that he let pretend be in charge. So, very just kind of switch things up. Yeah, you're using the Pathfinder 2e rules with tables from solo RPGs. Oh, yeah. Using maps from Donjon, Watabo, yeah. Proction in the world, map situations, with GM Fiat for immersion adjustment. Yeah, that seems like a very quick way to like get a bunch of stuff done real quick. That's a really cool system. Yeah. Be able to do that. Yeah, no trust equals a really bad game. If you have lost your players' trust, it's gonna be a hard game. It'll be a hard game. Consequences equal the game. Yeah, no, that's true. Having consequences is important. And they don't always have to be bad. You should have good consequences too. Like, hey, you did the right thing, and somebody's going to come back to show you help when you need it most. It's always like a nice little callback. We're like, hey, remember that person you did a random nice thing for? They're going to help you. They're going to return the favor. Even if they're just like the lowly old cabbage seller. They could help them out at some point. Maybe at some point they're involved in a street chase and they're getting chased by bad guys in the city. Maybe that cabbage seller sees them as like, hey, jump in my stack of cabbages. Jump in my cabbage cart. Nobody's going to check in here. And you're like, cool. So you do that one nice thing for the cabbage seller and that ends up saving you somewhere down the path. You never know. Consequences don't always have to be bad, is all I'm saying. Sometimes they can be good. So then we'll talk a little bit about interrupted scenes. So interrupted scenes, you have a subject, you have an action, you have an object. These are all D20 rolls. So it just got the tables right there. And I guess I should go through it. I should do the whole top down, do the whole thing. I guess I'll do the whole thing. Just talk about the simple quest-o-matic first. Kind of go through it. One of your players always tries to get the bandit faction to be their friends, gifting booze, etc. Because they know the consequences can be so good and useful. Yeah, I was just playing a game, the same game in which we fought off a were-shark. And my my character is sort of in the council chambers, kind of insulted. They're sort of like personal guards. And then as soon as he got out, he was like, that was probably a really bad idea. I was trying to make a point, but I also don't want to make my life any harder than it needs to be. And so just like flagged down an assistant there and gave them a sack full of gold and was like, hey, I need you to go buy like really good drinks for all the functionally royal guards. And let them know it's specifically from me. Like, so like it's not no hard feelings, just doing the thing. So we'll see. Maybe hopefully that'll come back for me in spades. It would be nice to. I don't really exposit too much about that campaign, but we are in a situation where we're not liked by a lot of people. So it's nice to have friends, especially when they have the power to arrest you. If they're maybe in your corner, which would be nice. So the simple quest-o-matic, I talked about that earlier, about having this sheet that has the role for like time to come up with an adventure. I don't know, something for the adventure, and this is one of those sources, is the quest-o-matic. And it basically fills in right here. The subject wants to action to object plus timer. There's a villain. Why do they want this? A patron. Why do they want this? And a reward. Why do the adventurers agree to go do this? So then it just kind of gives you some rolls. And I was thinking we could do one. No, I'm not going to do one live. You guys know how to roll on tables. I don't need to explain that for you. But it could be fun. No. Yeah. No, I couldn't. But I could. No, it's fine. We'll walk through it, but you guys will know how to do it very easily. Alright, so the first thing I might need is a subject. So let's say it's got down here, PC, belief, creed, doctrine, creatures ordinary, creatures extraordinary. So if the creature's sort of like mundane, so that could be, you know, your average people and natural beasts and things like that. Or creatures extraordinary, which are extraordinary creatures, monstrosities, dragons, extraplanar beings, fiends, and fae, and those are extraordinary creatures. An existing faction, a new faction, a hazard or obstacle, which is ordinary, a hazard or obstacle that is extraordinary. Info or technology that's ordinary, info or technology that's extraordinary. So that might be magic, some sort of magic item or things like that, or things about magic or about information, so powerful spells, weird magics, planar things, demon summoning things, anything that's weird, kind of, for the most part. Weird, not ordinary. Vague categories. Yeah, vague categories rather than specific monsters is beyond better than how most do it. Yeah, I just want to know, from my perspective, I was like, is this an ordinary thing that you come across like this? Is this a super mundane problem with super mundane people? Or is this a mundane problem with extraordinary people? Or an extraordinary situation that has to be dealt with by mundane people? Because those are all very different situations and very different ways to play. Yeah, situational to your setting, right? I don't have to rewrite a bunch of stuff. I don't have to white out a bunch of stuff and put in my own specific things. It's vague by design. Though some of this is very, I mean, it's my personal table, so it's me coded for sure. And I tend to run weirdly a very human-centric game. Usually not like chasing down the lithids and stuff like that. Usually, I mean, sometimes, but usually not chasing down like lithids or beholders or stuff like that. It's usually very surprisingly human problems that people are having. so let's do some patron. Well, let me say the timers first. So if I want a timer, most adventures work really well for having a timer. I think you should always roll for a timer. So on 13 plus, there's no timer anyways. So most of the time, there's going to be a little bit of a timer, but not very specific usually. You need to complete it before X happens. You need to complete it in some sort of window, like while X is happening. It's like, oh, it can only happen under the blood moon, or whatever like that. So it kind of gives you a very specific time frame, rather than a deadline. So you have a window that you're dealing with. Hold situations, so like you need to stop something from happening until... Right, you need to hold back the bad guys until reinforcements arrive, that sort of situation. Mentality. You need to complete once X happens, like, hey, you have to... Which is kind of a perversion of hold until X happens. It's like, you need to deal with this problem and hold this problem until I can do something that I can do, you know, XYZ, and then you're able to complete the mission. So it's kind of what came before, so it's kind of the hold plus actually doing it. So it's kind of a double up. You can work a plot twist or reveal into the premise. We've got our whole 1d20 of potential plot twists that we can work into there. And then 12, if I just happen to roll a 12 on a d20, is roll twice and combine. Again, most of the time that's just going to be just one thing, because it's likely that I'm going to roll a 13 or higher on one of those dies. So, but that's the table. It's very simple. And it tells me, it kind of gives that exterior pressure on the adventure for the players and the player characters. Be like, hey, you need to go do this thing and take care of it before, you know, X happens, or after X happens, or within X and Y, whatever it is. It kind of gives them this idea that time is a factor in the adventure, which is what we want. So that way they don't kind of waste their time. Right? They don't. One of the things that timers are really good for is they fight the 50-minute workday phenomenon, which is basically adventurers show up, they use all their cool abilities, and immediately try to go to sleep after their first combat, usually. Yeah, you need to use more timers. Yeah, it's a hard practice to kind of get into. But once you sort of get into it, it kind of becomes natural, and you're like, oh, right, I should add a timer to pretty much everything. Most of the time. And let's do our patron reward. So this is just an idea of, you know, it's hard to come up with the rewards for adventures. Sometimes it's not just like more gold, and then the players get the gold, and then they're like, great, I have a whole bunch of gold and nothing to spend it on. Because in 5e, we've set up the system where we can't buy magic items, and that's weird because you keep giving me gold, and I don't have anything to spend the gold on. So sometimes you want something that's not gold. So most of these are helpful. Things that I found, this is not spelled correctly, and I don't know why spell checker didn't pick that up. So the first one is favor. The patron's like, I'm going to do a favor for you if you do this for me. So no money whatsoever. The second is, I'm going to give you some sort of consumable item. Maybe I'm going to give you spell scrolls. Maybe I'm going to give you healing potions, alchemist fires, featherfall tokens. If this is the sort of thing, like this is a side quest in an overall larger adventure where they need featherfall tokens, and he's like, oh yeah, I got like a whole sack of featherfall tokens, you guys can have it, but you got to help me with this thing first. And then he's like, but then he can give you like 20 featherfall tokens or something like that. You're like, yay, we're going to have a very vertical adventure coming up, so that'll be very useful for you. So that would be... Then there's mundane gear or supplies. Rather than paying you in coin, I'm going to pay you with gear and mundane stuff. Which is works very well at the low levels. Once you get into higher level play, this becomes a little bit more difficult. You can offer them crafting supplies though, which is something many will take. Many parties will be interested in getting. Or you can give them some of the more expensive stuff. That's when you start being like, oh, well, we can give you... maybe we'll gift you with a stake in a mine or something like that. Actually, I think there's other stuff in here that address that a little bit better. What I was originally going to say is you can give them a boat and stuff like that. Like some of those more expensive things, mounts, things of that nature, that work like that. Yeah, the 15-minute adventure workday is one of the main reasons we switched to Pathfinder. Oh, really? Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, I think it's difficult in most systems, that any system that has a daily recharge basically for most everything in the game, it's hard to get around. Like, players are naturally going to want to kind of do that. Same for shopping. Pathfinder just isn't broken in that regard. Yeah, Pathfinder comes off the rated originally fork of 3X, and that's very much has a magic buying economy. 3 and 3.5 very much have an economy, and built in their world is like, yeah, you can just go buy magic items and sell them, and yeah, daily recharge is so hard to keep them from cheesing. Yeah, other than not letting them rest. Yeah. So mundane gear supplies, trade goods. So if you've watched any of the solo RPG, you have seen me give out so many trade goods as treasure. I almost never give. Well, I don't say almost never. Actually, it comes up pretty often. There's not a lot of cash usually. There's not a lot of raw coinage they come across. I say that, but they also did find, like, what was it, like 60 platinum pieces on one guy. So yeah, it goes the full gamut, the full range. Oftentimes we're just picking up like a handful of copper pieces, though. Some sort of magic item or component to create a magic item. That's a good one. Cash or promissory note. I like to do promissory notes a lot. You've definitely seen in the solo RPG series, but I'll usually give like a bank note. Be like, hey, if you take this back to whatever bank in whatever city, I'll give you 50 gold. Cool. Is that worth a trip? But also, you can just like real paper money. It's like you can hold on to a lot of promissory notes for a lot of money and basically no wait. And there often can be vended good as cash at a discounted rate usually. But you could, because in that way there's sort of like a American Express like traveler's checks where you can just show up and be like, hey, here's a check, give me money please. They hand you money for it. Same sort of thing. So you can kind of do those with promissory notes. They're going to do some sort of, the patron's going to provide some sort of service for you. It's like, hey, you guys need to travel to the end of this river out to the big port town. It's a long ways away. I will give you a ride on my river barge down there. That's the service I'll provide, but I need you to do this thing for me first. Very classic quest design. So, yes, I can do that for you. I'm not as interested in your cash. I actually have this issue I'd really like you to deal with instead. An introduction to a person, a letter of introduction is a very powerful tool. It can give you the ability to meet with people of higher society, which is usually how that's, again, this table is built for me and my personal games. So I definitely have the thing where it's like, you guys start out at the bottom and you don't know anybody and you don't have any sort of like social or political sway in the least. So you do not have the ability to just like rock up and be like, hey Duke, you got any jobs for me? And they're the sort of things like, you're not not on the list, you're not gonna make it past the front door, guy. Like, that's not gonna work for you. You're gonna have to come up with some other way to figure out how to do that, or build it up slowly by slowly. And one of the ways is the reward is a letter of introduction to a person. It's like, here, let me get you in touch with one of my more powerful friends, and then do it that way. The gold, in Pathfinder 2, because it's built around, the gold economy works because it's built around magic items and purchasing magic items and changing magic items, and yeah, it's a much more robust crafting system, and all that stuff's actually taken into account in Pathfinder. You're DMing a group through Dragon Heist, and they managed to piss off the Xanathars in Chapter 2. Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about having a big bad guy show up when you're severely underleveled. Yeah, promissory notes existed in real history. Yeah, They're common for, I mean, everybody needed credit. Actual physical coinage was pretty rare. Most people didn't have it unless you were some sort of traveling merchant. So most people had some sort of line of credit that they sort of used back and forth with each other. Or were paid in goods, like trade goods and things. That's why I have a lot more of that and a lot less just sort of random coinage that they have. Like, you're not walking around with $100,000 in the rubber band in your pocket. Yeah, common forever. Yeah, possible complications, who actually honors them. Yeah, so unless you take it to the bank or to the mint, there's nobody's guaranteed to take that as payment. But I feel like a lot of merchant places, especially larger cities, you can trade that for somebody to like a money lender or a money exchange, and they're going to give you gold. If they verify that it's real, they'll give you gold at a... And they're still making a profit, right? So they're going to give you a percentage of that gold. They'll probably take like a 10% off. So if it was, you know, a 50 gold promissory note and you gave it in, they'd be like, okay, I can give you 45 gold for it. And you'd be like, man, 45 gold. Okay, but I'll take it because otherwise this piece of paper is useless to me. And the gold I can use anywhere. So yeah, zero reason people can't swipe specific Pathfinder stuff and use it in other systems. Yeah, you converting, especially if you wanted to pull in the money system, Pathfinder, that would probably work, and use that. You'd have to do some noodling with the magic item rarities, probably a little bit, but it's probably not too much work to do that. So we have introduction to a person, letter of introduction, entrance to a place, like they give you a membership to some exclusive area, someplace, maybe you get to be able to use the college laboratory, or is it the chemical laboratory, or something like that, depending on what kind of game you're running. Right, gives you the ability to access things. Access things, places, and people. That's what these three are about. Like I said, I started with a game where you're sort of at the bottom, and you don't really have a lot of sway with people. So by getting these sorts of rewards, you then start to earn sway and able to access places and be able to work with things that you wouldn't have access to, or be able to get invited to social situations or meet with high-ranking people, bureaucrats, diplomats, royalty, nobles, those sorts of things, because as a reward for the adventuring you're doing. Eleven's a classic. Secrets or information? Always looking for secrets or information. Classic information broker adventure, for sure. Temporary boon or enhancement. They're like, hey, I'm gonna give you something that's gonna last for you for a little bit. That could be some like a divine boon. It could be some sort of arcane thing. It could be like, hey, I'm gonna let you borrow something. I'm gonna leash you something. Like, hey, you need I will let you borrow my slippers of spider climb for a while. Just make sure you bring it back to me. And so you get a temporary boon, but you are going to have to bring it back to me. Or they just give you a permanent boon or enhancement. Maybe you take some downtime and you go through like some very specific like conditioning routines at a gymnasium, and you come back and be like, all right, you get a +1 to either your strength, dexterity, or constitution, whichever one you want, because you guys did this special, fitness training, and it allows you to add a +1 to one of your ability scores that's physical, which would be a fun sort of permanent boon enchantment they just get. That you found somebody who has the sort of coaching acumen to be able to do something like that for you during downtime. Right, same thing, going to give you some sort of training or proficiency. I kind of just talked about that as a boon, but also if you wanted to train them for, oh yeah, you come with me and I agree to be your teacher for free and teach you, a specific proficiency with a skill set or a skill, a skill or a tool, whatever you want. And then the downtime, and then I might adjust the downtime depending, because trying to learn things through downtime is a pain in the butt. It takes a very long time. And 5e doesn't give you a lot of reasons. or what I should say is that I don't think it doesn't do a very good job of giving the DMs the tools to create a lot of downtime situations, or a good job of sort of framing what a typical adventure or campaign is for players, so they don't show up at the table thinking about, oh, we're gonna go on an adventure, you know, once, and the adventure's gonna take like a week, and then we're gonna have like 2 months of downtime after that, and that's sort of like the cadence of the campaign. Like, I don't think it does a good job of sort of like setting that up either. So it does kind of, it's hard. Downtime is hard because it doesn't feel very baked into the system a lot of the time. Holding a ton of enemy factions for unnecessary notes equals awkward. Hey, you just tell them that you took them off the people you killed. Yeah. Boons or packs can always be treated and generated the same as magic. Yes. Yeah. Downtime activities and exploration activities can be swiped from Pathfinder 2 as well. Lack of GM guidance sucks so bad. Yeah. I mean, I'm on record. I know a lot of people are on record. It's not exactly a hot take to be like, the 5e DMG is just, it's not very good. And it is one of the worst ones we've had in the history of the game, I feel like. And that might be more of a spicy take. I don't know if that's... That kind of depends on you and how you feel about it, I feel like. But maybe. I think it's one of the bad ones. Like, anyway, that's an entirely different topic. Don't get me down that rabbit hole. I won't leave. Property lease or ownership. Yeah, you do this thing as like, you know what? You own this tavern now. Maybe it's where you saw off the adventure as like the adventure is about, you know, finding who killed the tavern keeper, and at the end of the adventure they're like, great work. You can keep the tavern, I guess. So they just give you the deed to the tavern. You're like, oh, this is a great boon, but also that's a great way to sort of like get players into the downtime mechanics. Be like, hey, now you also have to take care of this thing, which is going to be a money generator for you, but then you also have to run into the problem that 5e has, where it's like, but also, what am I supposed to do with all the money that I'm generating? I can't spend it on magic items. So, I mean, I can play Monopoly with it, and I can buy other properties or lease other properties and turn them into beneficial businesses, and now I'm playing a totally different game than D&D most of the time. It's like, yeah, I could go stop the dragon, but I really need to worry about my corn futures. And it's not a bad game. It's not even a game that I'm not saying that I wouldn't enjoy. I probably would enjoy it. I'm boring like that. Be like, yeah, I totally wouldn't play somebody who becomes sort of a robber baron and takes over this place and rules it successfully, creating a lineage through sword and through fire. And then good management practices. You can be rewarded with a title or office, right? You get a little bit like, hey, great work. You're the bailiff now. We'd like to give you the title of bailiff. Oh, wasn't really planning to stay here very long, so thank you, but politely decline. I'm actually have to go adventure that way. I'm not gonna stay here and be your constable, basically. Number 17, proven ready for the real task. Now, the first adventure is just making sure that you're up to the real task. So your reward for good work is more work. Some sort of license or liberty is one of the things that came up in a game that a few of my friends and I, when our normal campaign isn't playing, we're playing sort of like a GM-less, very sort of like solo TTRPG, but with all of us, so we're using this exact same system. And we rolled for one of the things that we were going to get was license or liberty, and we're like, okay, one of the things that we're going to get as a reward for this action is we're actually going to get the adventurer's license, so we can actually wear armor and carry our weapons in the city. Because other than that, we weren't able to do that. We had to keep our weapons piece knotted, and we couldn't wear our armor, which made getting into altercations in the city very dicey for our more martial characters. And I really enjoy number 19. Number 19 is a thank you, and you're always welcome in my home. You get a hearty handshake. Thanks for saving my family. Here's a handshake. You're welcome to stay here, but I have nothing to give you. Or I choose not to give to you. Which might turn a very wealthy merchant. If the wealthy merchant is like, yeah, I'm actually not going to give you any sort of like monetary reward, can make, enemies, and then you have a cool rival thing that starts happening, and maybe they hate that NPC, and then you lean into that, and you're like, well, now this NPC hates you because you're talking bad about him around town. And then number 20 is some sort of forgiveness of debt or transgression. Adventurers do a lot of stuff that are legally and morally gray, let's say. So, sometimes just the forgiveness of a debt or some sort of, maybe not super nice thing they did, maybe some sort of slightly illegal thing they did, getting forgiveness from that, from an area, from whatever the powers may be that are in that area, can actually be a very nice reward for the player characters. Yeah, I turned my D&D into Merchant Trader Sim. If it didn't bore other players, and I wasn't the forever GM, I'd recreate Stardew Valley in a heartbeat. yeah, I mean, you can have just like a chill D&D game where you're like, you can pull out a bunch of that like sort of Strixhaven stuff and be like, I'm just gonna run a solo RPG where I'm just just trying to take care of my farm. And I'm not playing a druid, so it's actually like I gotta actually work at it. Yeah, adding a piece not for weapons now, thanks. Yeah, I was like, yeah, you can't rock up to, at least in my world, in the games that I play, you can't rock up to like the front gate of a city with like 6 heavily armed and dangerous people and be like, hey, can we come in? No, you can't come in. Yeah, Strixhaven has rules for things like part-time jobs and things. It's a weird system. Right, because you can be a barista in it. So you can have like part-time jobs and, just holding it down, that kind of stuff. And it has more, because it's built around a sort of like school curriculum, it has more like seasonal stuff that's kind of going on. So it kind of gives you a little bit more framework for that kind of stuff, measuring a campaign like that. So it is, I mean, Strixhaven is a very cool resource. I'm just not sure that it was a book that I really wanted or needed as a dungeon master and or D&D player. But it is something that, after looking at it, I'm like, this is neat. And it does make me think about D&D, what D&D could do. If I wanted to really kind of bend it and make it do something that's not the D&D niche fantasy. Patchworking that in if it works, yeah. But yeah, as far as sort of like that license or liberty is like, yeah, you can't just... Cities don't just let you walk around in heavy armor with massive weapons, ready to fight and murder people at any point. It's like, so yeah, they're like, no, you can't. Usually I'm like, well, you can wear light armor, and you can carry a blade that's, you can basically carry a dagger. Sometimes a short sword. You might get by with it. Usually I'm like, well, you can't have a blade that's longer than your forearm. So you just kind of like look at your forearm and be like, okay, is the blade longer than that? Dagger's not. Short sword, maybe. Kind of depends. So I think that's one of those sort of like wishy-washy things where it's like, if you have a rogue and the rogue can be like, yeah, but I really, it's just kind of a long knife. It's not really a short sword, necessarily. So kind of give it ways where they can kind of like charm their way through, and the guards will be like, yeah, whatever, get through. Just don't let me catch you with using that thing, kind of thing. Oh, patchworking in the non-heroic stuff. Yeah, job roles, stuff like that. Yeah. You can do that stuff with your NPCs probably. Yeah, if you're doing like a solo thing, that's a very fun thing to just be like, they're just holding down the job. So yeah, that was all our Patreon rewards. talked about interrupted scene. So interrupted scene has a subject, an action, or an object. So we talked about the subject and objects already. Right? No. No, we didn't. I made that up. Or did we? No, we did. Nah, you almost got me. But we didn't talk about the actions yet. So you have a subject, an action, or an object. So the actions are aid or help, betray or misbehave, bribe, buy or recruit, change or transform, create, release, or use, defend against destroy or slay, find, reveal, or seek, escape or flee, gain faith, morale, or trust, hamper or hinder, hide, obfuscate, or secret away, lose faith, morale, or trust, prevent, create, release, or use, protect against steal or take, chase or pursue, questions or changes mind, resists or survives, steal or take. That'll give you that. There you go. Now you can see all 20. So yeah, it just kind of gives me basic action. So if you take that subject and action object and kind of toss them together, that gives you a good interrupted scene. And you can also use these with the simple sort of questomatic, which is the subject wants to do an action to an object, and then you're like, is there a timer with it? And then you kind of fill out the little last little bits to be like, okay, who's the villain in this situation, if anybody, and why do they want this to happen? Who's the patron in this situation? Why do they want what they're asking you to do to happen? And then you talk about sort of the patron rewards and why do you as the adventurers agree to go do this thing? Because they're going to offer you that you're proven ready for the real task. Sure. Maybe the patron's very vague about like, depending on how you set it up. Like if they're here for a different reason, then this is like a side quest, like a buffer side quest as an introduction. Or you kind of switch it around to be it the other way and be like, they're very cagey about being like, oh, the reward will definitely be worth it. And they're very cagey about what you're going to get out of it. And you're like, I don't know if I trust this guy, but I mean, like, we need work, so I guess. And then you get back and it's like, oh, you've proven yourselves worthy. Now, I want you to take on the real challenge. Something like that. Yeah, you'd like to do that sort of downtime rules and such to play the factions while my players play their characters. So far I haven't figured out a way that isn't completely unneeded and clunky. Yeah, it's hard to do. Faction turns are kind of weird. So I think I talk about this in my favorite 2d6 tables video. So if you want to check that out, you can check that out. Where I talk about my countdown timers. And that's usually a good thing. It'd be like, hey, when you have an idea, even just like an idea, it's like, okay, I think the factions are going to do this thing. Like, they have this motivation. They're trying to do this thing, and I'm going to assign a die value to it. And then at the end of every session, I roll that die, and it steps down. It's a step-down ladder. And as you step down the ladder, the player characters get in-universe, like in-world, notice that, like, hey, something's happening with this faction, or something has happened. They get news of something, that they're succeeding in their efforts of whatever they're trying to do. So that could be an interesting way to do it. That's usually the way that I do that. And I do that same sort of step down ladder resource die for backstory elements for characters, for player characters. I find that's really useful. It's like, hey, I know that your brother's going to come looking for you, and I'm going to start that ladder at like a d6. And so if I roll a 1 on the d6 after the session, it goes down to a d4. If I roll a 1 on the d4 after a session, it goes to 1, and then there's one more session, and then basically the next session, that brother's going to show up to do something. Mouse Rooter has rules like that. Timers with dice for outcome. Yeah, it's very similar to Blades in the Dark's clocks system. I was using it before Blades in the Dark was out, but they are very similar. And that clock system is even older than that. I'm pretty sure that's a Burning Wheel thing. I'd have to go back and check. I think it's a Burning Wheel thing. I think that's at least where I first saw it come up. And then down here, just for the extra things, so instead of using this guy, which was the sort of prompt table, I have a descriptor table It's useful for when people ask me like random questions about stuff, and I'm like, I find it useful for naming things too, sometimes. So I had to come up with a name for a dance hall in that sort of side game that I'm playing, GMless game. And I was like, I was just making up the study because I knew we were going there behind the scenes. So it's like, oh, well, I need this dance hall because that's where our bard character is going to be. So there's a music venue because there's a bard in town, so that makes sense. And so I was like, I don't know what to call this thing. So I rolled randomly, and I ended up getting color pattern. So it's just called Paisley Hall, which sounds good to me. Like that sounds like a real place to me. Like I could put that into a Google search, and it would probably bring up a location. I'd be like, oh, there it is. I didn't do that, so I don't know if it's actually a place, but it sounds like a place to me, and I like that. So yeah, it's just a D66 descriptor table. If you don't know how to roll a D66, I don't blame you. It's not necessarily easy to know. It's 2d6. But you roll them the same way that you roll like percentile dice with 2d10s. You just do that with d6s. So it starts at 11. So 11 to 16, 21 to 26, 31 to 36, 41 to 46, 51 to 56, 61 to 66. So it actually gives you, I don't even remember that's, it gives you what, 36 results? A table of 36, which is no other way to do that table, really. Yeah, Burning Wheel is where Mouse Ritter took it from. Yeah, Burning Wheel's been around for a while, so it's probably Burning Wheel. So yeah, they're just things to help me. Like I use this table especially when I'm naming things, where I'm like, oh, there's a hill. What's the name of that hill? I guess I will grab my dice. Where are they? I need to name a hill. Let me grab some dice. I'm gonna grab 2d6. This hill is named 2-6. Material. Okay, so some sort of material. So it could just be named Iron Hill. That's the material it's made out of. Could be Silk Hill. Could be it could be anything, really. Just out of any sort of material that you want to make it out of. So it could be metal. It could be, or probably not plastic if we're doing a fantasy game. But it could be sort of like that adamantine hill. Okay, makes sense. So I use that for descriptors for, they're descriptors, so you can use them, you can throw them on anything. Like you can use it to describe an NPC. So let's say I'm gonna roll, I'll say roll twice, and I'll give those as descriptors for a new NPC. So 61, map direction, relative proximity. Okay, that's an interesting one. And 41. They are polite or vulgar. Yeah, like they have this weird thing. So they're exceptionally polite, but you notice that after you talk with them for a little bit, and maybe you're moving with them, like you're walking and talking, you realize that the person that you're talking with, they always orient themselves so their shadow is also facing you. It seems to be like this weird quirk they do. So the sun feels like it's almost always at their back when you're interacting with them. And, that might be enough for be like, that is a super weird NPC behavior. What is wrong with this person? And, if you're running a random game, you'd be like, I don't know. You're going to investigate that? How are you going to investigate that? Maybe they're just weird. Maybe they just have some sort of weird tick. Oh, you couldn't GM without name generators? Yeah, it's actually one of the things that I don't worry about too much. I'm just weird in that sense. I do have a little table and just some off-the-cuff NPCs that I have. Just like I think I have like 10 of them. And it's just like when I need a random NPC, I just grab that sheet. But yeah, you could just give them these descriptors and be like, okay, this is a weird NPC who is very polite, but always seems to orient themselves so their shadow falls upon you. And you'd be like, what the? this guy some sort of like weird vampire or something? Like, who knows, or some sort of shadow creature? Are they using some sort of like weird shadow magic on me? All sorts of cool things, right? He might be some sort of shadow assassin, who knows? And if they decide to run down that rabbit trail, they'll figure out something about that. I don't know if that's what's going to happen or not. It kind of depends on the game, right? Or maybe they just decided that they're a weird person. Or maybe they bluntly ask them and I have to come up with some reason what they tell them that for. So after that, and then organizing for play, this just kind of tells, this is about the sort of like the solo aspect of playing it, so it's not as useful for, I say that. I definitely feel like it is useful for just managing a game. So it's for organizing play, is for tracking the important elements in play to help make things flow very easily. Below are sort of some numbered for randomizing lists recommended that I use, like plots and story tracks, having a numbered list of that, a numbered list of your PCs, and any sort of like sidekicks and stuff that are with them, whoever the core party are. Factions and groups, and below them, their associated NPCs. It's sort of like a nested list. Places and locations, which also may have PCs under them if they don't fall into some other sort of faction or group. And VIP items, resources, MacGuffins, other things that you want to track. Like if you have that, a MacGuffin, a literal MacGuffin, like some sort of important plot thing that you need to keep track of, you have a section for that. Or if they have, they've picked up a sentient sword along the way, you probably want that under there too. And you might also, if it's a sentient sword, you might also want to put it under factions and groups and NPCs. You might put it under, you actually might put it under the PCs list. Be like, so now things that affect the party can also affect the magic sword, which would be an interesting way to do it. Knowingly bringing a shadow around that hides in their shadow. Yeah, that's very, like, that's, for me, I'm like, that's such a simple, evocative thing, and that you just dangle that bait out there, and your players are going to jump on it like they're wild cats on raw meat. They're just going to pounce on that and be like, what does it mean? It's like, I don't know. You tell me. If you decide that this is going to be important to the game, I'll see if I can make it important to the game. But otherwise, this is just a random NPC I literally just rolled. So yeah, I might do, like, if I was making an NPC on the fly, I might use this D66 descriptor and add it to, I just put my dice box on top of it. Get out of here, dice box. Not like this. Okay. One of the things I do have in the DM binder is I have a D100 table that's just like random NPC, primarily vocations, like jobs, but they're just stuff in general. So like number 24 is a bathhouse or gymnasium owner or attendant. So somebody who works at a gymnasium or a bathhouse. So if you take that and you do like our two descriptors, so maybe I decide that is the owner of a bathhouse, which now gives some sort of like weird, creepy undertones to them with their shadow stuff. And be like, oh, well, now there's got to be some sort of plot that's going on with that bathhouse owner with the weird shadow. That, yeah. A share vocation table. Yeah, you want me to share the vocation table? I think I might have it up somewhere. I can't remember if it's in my GM Quick Reference or not. So it's coupled together from so many other tables. You can basically find a different table on it. But I do like, if every result, there's like way more than 100 in here. But like every result, I usually have 2 or 3 different things on the line to make it a little bit more useful. You use a table for that from Plight and apply it to hostile enemies sometimes. Oh yeah. Bad guys have day jobs too. There's no reason they don't have day jobs. A goblin, mushroom farmer, or beekeeper or something. Yeah, no, that's super cool. I like that. So yeah, just using the descriptors, and that's for anything. It's for naming things like the Paisley Hall. It's for coming up with NPCs. It's for if they ask me, they could ask me. I'll do one more roll. I'm just showing it off. I love to roll dice. That's my problem. So if they were like, oh, well, I'm running attention. They're like, oh, well, what's the? You said there was a big sort of fresco on the wall. What's the fresco about? I don't know. Why did you ask me that? It's not important. It was just dressing. 42. It's something about honesty or dishonesty. And 46. Odor. Honesty. It's sage advice about he who smelt it must have dealt it. You're like, what? It's like, yeah, it appears to be a fresco that's about flatulence. Oracle time. That's what the fresco is about. The fresco is about when you fart, you have to own up to your fart. That's what the fresco is about. I don't know why that's important. You tell me why that's important. You're the one who's looking at the painting that doesn't matter to anything. But yeah, sometimes it'll give you weird, wonky results. So if you were in the bathhouse, like we were saying, that was the bathhouse, that might be like there's a fresco on the walls that has like rules or etiquette for the bathhouse. And you're like, yeah, so it's about etiquette in the bathhouse, so it's about flatulence. Which would be very funny. Or sometimes that result doesn't make any sense and you go, I'm not going to use that, I'm going to use something else. But yeah, that's sort of the descriptors. So the descriptors are super easy. I'm not going to roll through all of them, but they're what you expect. Things like high and low, quantity or quality, volume, music, sound, noise, speed, time, age, function, industry, job, odor, beauty or, ugly, plain or unremarkable, hidden, obstructed, prominent, action verb. I literally just have action verb in there. So, yeah, I could run action verb, like, let's say I was doing a tavern. So I got action verb and 32. Action verb and land form. I'd name it something like the sliding hill or something like that, and it has an image of like maybe there's a nearby hillside that's kind of like cattywampus, kind of leans over, has sort of like a cliff overhang, and now it's just called, or yeah, we'll call it the Leaning Hill. So now it's the Leaning Hill Tavern or whatever. And you're like, oh, there's a place that's nearby that's got a leaning hill that kind of has a cliffside overhang. Sounds good. That's the name of the place. Put the collaborative and collaborative storytelling into practice. Yeah. Their rabbit hole. Yeah, you can run wherever you want to run. Yeah, unless we can turn it into an easy hook. It's always nice to be able to like turn it into something that's useful for whatever you're doing. But sometimes it's okay to just kind of be silly. Be like, yeah, it's a fresco about farting in the bath and how you're not supposed to do it. And certainly don't deny doing it. So yeah, and then the organizing for play has all the stuff that I like to kind of keep track of. As you play, update the lists. I do all that stuff. Again, most of the rest of this stuff is very, very straightforward. Kind of like, this is things to help me or whoever I send it to kind of do the solo aspect of it. You don't really need that much of that for running for a group, right? Because you're gonna have preps. You don't need that aspect and you probably have your own campaign management going on, so you don't really need those lists as much. They're helpful if you need a way to organize your campaign, but if you've already got that taken care of, you don't need to worry about the rest of that stuff. But yeah, that is I think that's most of what I wanted to talk about for this. I'm trying to think, is there anything else that I want to make sure I touch on before we kind of go on? Like I said, if you want to see that Oracle in action, all you gotta do is watch the solo RPG playlist. I've got it on the channel. You can go check it out. Super fun. I enjoy it. Other people seem to enjoy watching it, so give it a check out if you want to see what solo tabletop playing kind of looks like. Whoa, 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 go back! Hey, we're done with it now. We're done with it now. You can always pause it later if you need to. After the fact. So yeah, that was sort of that's sort of my personal DM tables. But there are published ones you should check out. I checked out a lot of different ones before I kind of was like, came across, I was like, I like different pieces of different ones, but none of them kind of felt specifically what I was kind of looking for out of a GM Oracle, which is the only reason I would ever say go build your own, because I played with some of the other ones and then I was like, yeah, these are good, but they don't quite get me where I want to go. It at least told me where I wanted, where sort of like I wanted my Oracle to sit, because it gave me a lot of sort of relational points to kind of base that information off of. Oh, organizing campaign help. Yeah, I'll bring up the organizing campaign. Yeah, sure. We can walk through it. That's fine. It's not a big deal. Yeah, let me swap back over, and we can take a look at that. That's fine. We'll look at that real quick. Down here at the bottom, organizing for play. I can probably actually zoom in a little bit. Where's zoom here? There we go. Like 150. Yeah, we'll do like 150. So I'll just read it out. Organizing for play. Tracking the important elements in play will make things flow. Below are the numbered for randomizing. Lists recommended. Plots or story tracks. PCs. And anybody who's in the adventuring party, really. Like I said, if you have sidekicks and stuff like that, they should probably be in there too. Factions and groups, and their, as a sublist, sort of like their specific NPCs, as you learn about them. Places and locations in the world as well. You may want to nest NPCs up there. NPCs rarely should be just hanging out by themselves in that list, so they should be nested under either a location or a faction or group. Sometimes both. And then VIP items, resources, MacGuffins, the sort of like important pieces of plot ephemera you need to keep track of, or backstory elements, stuff that you want to keep track of. If you've decided for the characters to roll those D100 trinkets tables, maybe you want to put their specific weird trinkets, mysterious trinkets under there. As you play, update these lists with new developments and remove outdated items as you close the related plots and story tracks. Due to the frequency of list changes, it's encouraged to manage lists in digital form. Can be used alone to run a solo or GM-less TTRPG session, or combined with your preferred TTRPG system to incorporate non-system specific elements. Which is a fancy way of saying that you could just run an entire self-made game with the Oracle. You don't actually need any other system, because it's going to answer any yes-no questions that you want for it, of anything that you try. So you can't run it just by itself if you want to do like a real free-form kind of thing. But if you're trying to test out a system where you just really love playing D&D or whatever, you can just layer the system on top of that. Try to use the specific system to do any sort of resolution mechanics that you can, and only use the GM Oracle when you have to, kind of. So instead of being like, one of the examples I give is that, we'll take the crate example that I did at the very beginning, where it's like, I walked into a room. Are there any crates in here that I can hide behind? Rather than just saying yes or no, I said yes or no because it's like it was clear that you would be able to know at a glance whether there are crates or not in the room. But if you were like, oh, is there actually a specific place I can hide? Well, that's actually a stealth check that you're making, so you need to make a stealth check. So if you make a stealth check and it's a good stealth check, and then I'm like, well, now I actually need to see if there is a place for you to hide. You're competent enough in the hiding to know that you could hide if there was a place. But there might not be a place that you can really kind of like break line of sight from people who might be in the room. So that's sort of the thing, is that you want to use as much of the system itself as you can. Yeah, you're using a Notes app? Yeah. No, Notes app works great. Keep track of names, situations, yeah. It works, but there has to be a better way. I don't know, my friends and I just use a Google Docs, and now that they just rolled out the tabbed feature, that's going to make our life so much easier. I can actually, instead of making a longer document with using the sidebar, I can now just put those things in different tabs, and I can just swap between the tabs. which I think is going to make life a lot faster, or at least simpler. Maybe not faster, but at least simpler. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for hanging out for the stream, for sure. What program do I use for this? Yeah, I mean, you're looking at it. You can check out the solo RPG, but you're pretty much looking at it. I just have a Google Doc that's got all that stuff in it, and I kind of keep track of it as I'm going on. And then I have a digital hex map that we use for kind of hex crawling, and that's about it. I actually don't use like a VTT for like the combat situations, but I try not to make them particularly long or super in-depth combats. There's a lot more of them, but they tend to be pretty light and quick. Oh, that's very kind. I'm not sure if it's got here, but thanks for hanging out, and I'm glad that you find it useful, that this will be useful for you. Let's see, let me finish off with... Did I say everything that needed to be in here? No, I have not. Do the frequency... Can't be used alone to run a solo RGM. We did that. Simply ask a yes or no question and roll the die to determine the answer. The 1d20 GM Oracle roll can be modified where one outcome is more likely than another. That's our plus or minus 3 and plus and minus 5. Edges and hindrances alter the current scene by creating a minor advantage or disadvantage. Roll on the following 1d20 edge hindrance alteration table to determine the addition's nature. Alternatively, when an edge or hindrance wouldn't make sense, or you want to keep play fast and easy, apply a common mechanical bonus or penalty, 5e's advantage, disadvantage mechanic, to the next core mechanic roll. Attack, check, save, whatever. You're like, I don't know what this is, but you get advantage on the next persuasion check you make in this, because I don't know how to interpret it, but you've gleaned some sort of insight into their personality, and now you feel a little bit more confident about how to communicate with them. And then down here we have subject and object. Subject and object and 1d20 action tables. Use those as needed. The tables can be used in conjunction with your prepared list to randomly determine specific types of subject or object. Using GM Fiat to choose a scene interrupt is perfectly acceptable if you're stuck with sudden inspiration for interrupting the scene. Yeah. Basically, always use a good idea if you have a good idea. And then if you don't have a good idea, roll on the chart. If that still doesn't give you a good idea, you can either roll on the chart again or just move on. And it's perfectly fine to be like, I don't know what this is, and I don't want to waste any more time on it, so we're just going to move on, and I'm going to think about something else. What is the digital hex map in? Yeah, sure. The digital hex map, I use a little program called HexTML. I'll pull it up real quick, just so you can see it. So it's this. Super simple. It's a little web app interface. It is hextml.playtest.net. You can come in here and you can make your own. You can be like, I can clear it. Or if I want to make it bigger, let's say I want to make it like 20 by 20. So I'm going to set that size. Now I've set the size, and I'm going to generate, because just put some land down in it for me. There we go. We can do that. Let's zoom out a little bit. You can see it. Ta-da! And then you can start putting a bunch of stuff in there. I'm not going to pull up one of my maps right now, but certainly if you play the solo RPG, you'll see me, as we hex crawl, we fill out this map as we're kind of going along. But yeah, I think that's everything for the GM Oracle. Let me swap back over again. I think that's... Oh, I was going to talk about published before we leave. I'm going to talk about published GM Oracles to check out. The big granddaddy of them all is the Mythic GM emulator. That's probably the best known and one of the most robust systems. So if you're not sure, and it's system neutral, so it's great for that way. And it's a perfect thing to test out. Is that I think it's a good starting point because it's going to give you all the bells and whistles, and I think it will be helpful for a lot of people to realize when you're testing out the systems, if you're looking for your specific Oracle, how much of everything you need. Because I feel like Mythic GM emulator is a very sort of kitchen sink approach. It kind of has everything in it. So that's one of the things I came into, and I used it for a little bit. Then I was like, this kind of has more stuff in it, but I'm not using a lot of the stuff. So I'm going to carve out a little piece that I like, do this, and realize that this is the sort of stuff that I don't find useful, so I don't want this in my custom system, and then kind of cobble together my system, using that as sort of a very natural starting place. But it's also a really great one And like I said, you can use that one and not run any other system with it. If you just want to do a light and free sort of solo RPG experience, you can try that out. You can probably run a game for other people using it, actually. I haven't tried that. I bet you could do that, though. So Mythic GM Emulator is kind of the big one, the big granddaddy. Yeah, it's good. It is very good. And the second version of it's out now, which I've only messed with a little bit. I do like some of the changes for how to set up the list and stuff, though. I do like those changes, and those are things that I need to implement sort of into my system, because I like those options a lot better. I think there's a lot stronger way of managing those lists and keeping them from spiraling out, which is one issue I'm having. The other probably big and chewy system to kind of get a handle on if you're looking for something is the Solo Adventurer's Toolbox. You can get that on DriveThruRPG, I'm pretty sure, as well as a number of other places. And they have like the big one, and I think there's two versions of it now. There's 1 and 2, and you can use them together or separately, I believe. And then they have like some supplementary things that are kind of like, here's one for dungeon crawling, here's one for I think hex crawling or doing cities, and I think they have a lot of more like specific themed ones too, if you're looking for something like that. I think they may have some non-fantasy ones as well. I think. Maybe not. I don't remember. But I do know that they have multiple products to kind of check out if you're kind of looking for something that way. And then the third that I would probably recommend is Scarlet Heroes. Scarlet Heroes is a full TTRPG system in its own right. And it has a baked-in interesting setting that's kind of like this Bronze Age collapse kind of sort of situation. It's very cool world. And that comes from Kevin Crawford, and anybody who's watched the channel knows that I am a fan of Kevin Crawford's, and I do like his other noted works. Worlds Without Number, Stars Without Number, both which are massively useful books if you want to run sci-fi games or fantasy games, and gives you a lot of those books are a lot of sort of like world building stuff and a lot of tables and how to sort of set up star systems or fantasy worlds and different domains and adventure sites and all that stuff. So if you're looking for something that's somewhere in between like I almost want to say like a campaign setting, like let me say like an Eberron kind of book. It's like, hey, let me tell you everything about this campaign setting, and between that and like the Tome of Adventure Design, Scarlet Heroes, the sort of like tables and stuff like that, it's kind of like those two things kind of mishmashed together. So it's kind of built specifically for what Scarlet Heroes does, but it is an interesting thing, and the system is baked in, has a baked-in solo TTRPG engine for it. So you could just pick it up, and it's its own rule set with the idea built into the rule set that you can run this by yourself if you want to, which is very cool. And I've only messed with it a little bit. I don't know. Maybe we'll do a stream of that. That might be something we do once we finish up our current campaign. Whatever that might be. Maybe try out a different system. Because I like 5e, but now we're in PHP 2024 land, so, and I'm still using the old legacy stuff, so not that that's bad. It just is. So I think maybe try out something else while I'm still kind of getting it, especially as I'm still sort of getting a handle on some of the changes that are in the Player's Handbook 2024. So I'm not as comfortable with that system yet, or the changes that they've made to the existing system, which makes it somewhat more confusing. What to avoid with GM oracles. Just like any random table or ChatGPT or any sort of written adventure modules, the tools are they're meant to help you. They're aids for you as the DM, and not to force you under like the thumb of those tools, whether that's an adventure module or stuff. Like, you are still the one who's driving the ship, or piloting the ship? Technically piloting the ship, right? Piloting the ship, so you get to make the yes/no decisions. You don't have to be beholden to anything that those things put out, if they don't work for the game that you're trying to run or trying to manage, really. Yeah, you're using the sidekick running games for other characters, making things lightning fast. Yeah, being able to run a system by myself for myself gives me the confidence to run it for others. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I came across, is that people that I found who were maybe interested in becoming a dungeon master, but also kind of being like, oh, well, I can never do that. Like, I don't have the confidence to do it. And be like, well, why don't you try out some solo RPG stuff first? I feel like it's a good way to start to get into a sense of like, oh, this is what my dungeon master or game master is doing. He's just doing this one piece for all of us instead of me playing a character and doing that piece for myself. It's like I think it gives you a better appreciation about what it takes, what you need to do to be a dungeon master or game master, and how you get from not knowing anything to being in a position where, like, okay, I feel a lot more comfortable about being able to manage things, improvise things, understand how the flow of the game's going to go before I sit down behind the screen for other people for the first time. So yeah, I think it's a very natural progression. I think it's definitely something that when I come across people who seem like they might be interested in DMing, or I think they would be particularly good at it, where I'm like, why don't you try out some solo game stuff and see if maybe DMing something you're interested in. They'll be like, oh, okay. And I've had good success with it. I've had people who've done it and are like, oh yeah, actually I think I want to run some games. Let's see. Any good idea should always trump random things. So if you are, DMing a situation, you have that strike of lightning and you have a good idea pop up in your brain, like, just use it. Just like throw it in right now, rather than wait or like confirm it with a die roll. Like, it's own. We lose so many cool ideas because we don't use them when we come up with them. So as soon as you get them, like, just go ahead and use them as fast as you can. Even if it makes your perfect game slightly less cohesive, you're still probably going to be happier that you used the good idea rather than sat on it and put it in a drawer for a rainy day that may never come. Feel free to dump or augment the results as they make sense. You can always just go with your gut or re-roll if you start having to do like mental gymnastics in real game time trying to make weird things work. That's going to be your sign to be like, if it's not quick, if it's not super easy, then I just need to re-roll or choose something else, or just pass by this moment and be like, you know what, nothing, I don't know what would happen, so nothing happens. And that's okay to do. Just like with a video game, the strength of a DM or GM is our ability to adjust and course correct content based on feedback we get at the table. That's not something any tool or AI or video game can really do yet. Is to be able to sort of adjudicate anything that a group of human brains can come up with. So you don't have to worry about AI coming for your job yet. Maybe to run modules though. Maybe to run modules. That'd be an interesting one. Yeah, it's not hard. You just need organized tools. Yeah, you have to be organized to be successful, especially for solo. You have to be organized, or else you are not going to be able to keep track of it. It's hard to do sometimes. You have to be eclectic and swipe from so many different systems before you get to something that actually flows and doesn't leave you flapping in the breeze. That's true. Yeah, I feel like you definitely have to find. It takes time to find what's going to work right for you. And we each, as Dungeon Masters and Game Masters, we each have our own particular style or type of game that we're generally trying to run. And so it's hard to take something off the shelf and expect that it's going to be a tailored fit for us. Just like getting clothes off the rack. It's like, it's not going to be a tailored fit. You have to take the time to take it to the tailor and have it, to cobble together what we need, and we have to do that work ourselves. We have to buy something off the rack and then do any of the tailoring in our at home with our own sewing machine. We can't just dump it off at an actual tailor. So that would be interesting, but we're not there yet. Maybe that's the future of AI. Maybe that'll be the future where they can work in and be like, hey, could you just take what you know about GM Oracle systems and build one custom based on me, based off of what you know my experience of gaming to be? That would be wild. I feel like we could get there with personal assistant AIs. If you had an AI listen to, see all your D&D prep work and listen to all your sessions, they'd probably be able to get an idea for that, I feel like. Which is both helpful and kind of frightening to think about. Yeah, and the style that your players enjoy as well. Ugh. Who cares if they enjoy the game as long as I'm enjoying the game? That's the real question. Maybe that's why I can't find anybody to play with me. But yeah, you definitely want something that's right for you and your table. I think that's pretty much it. Have you guys used GM oracles before? And like, to what extent? Like, have you used it for a solo TTRPG element, or have you used it for sort of like aided to help you run the game, or maybe, like I said, maybe help with some prep kind of stuff? Because I definitely use it probably more for prep than I do in actual games, I feel like, most of the time. At least some of the more like detailed things, like coming up with side quests and stuff like that. Like doing that stuff, that adventure prep. I use a lot of that way more in prep than I do trying to come up with a general adventure, like on the fly at the table. I mean, I could do it. It just wouldn't be any fun to watch for me just sit behind the screen and roll tables real quick. So yeah, if you liked it, of course, like the content. Thank you guys for hanging out with me as always, and let me sort of dump some of this GM Oracle stuff onto you guys, because I knew this one has been in the pipe for a while and I really wanted to get around to it, but I was able to get around to it and we got it done. And everything's great. So thank you, of course, for hanging out there. Hopefully, if you like the content, like it. If you're not subscribed, think about subscribing. Most importantly, if you know somebody who would also enjoy it, share it. Social media, share it on social media, on Reddit, on your preferred RPG forum, whether that's Ian World or D&D Beyond, or wherever it is you get in the comments and do your edition wars. Just go ahead and drop this in there too to let people know. That'd be great, because that's always helpful to get this in front of other people and not just have to worry about YouTube being able to sort of give it out to people. So any other external source is very helpful. Other things, we have DriveThruRPG store, everything's in it, pay what you want. You can check that out. You can check out redraggedfiend.com if you want to look at more blog stuff. We've written a lot of blogs over the years, so if you're looking for more of this sort of advice, you can always check that out. What else am I forgetting? Oh, you can also, if you want to help support me, you can give me some $roonies if you have some of those over on Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/redraggedfiend. But yeah, no, that's everything, I think. Yeah, this kind of stuff getting in front of people would result in more GMs. I'd like to think so. That's what I'd like to do. I'd like to help people feel like, get to a point where they feel like they can run games, be confident in run games, and want to run games. Like, it's fun. I don't do it because it's a burden. I like to run games. I think you can find your specific fun in running games too. It's nice to see a content creator giving really useful advice for actually running the game rather than clickbait homebrews. Well, thank you. I mean, here's the thing, this clickbait works, right? That's the problem. But I'm also, one of the things that I wanted to do with this channel and with this content is, like, I'm not really trying to become a YouTube celebrity or a millionaire or anything like that. It's like, I have a full 9-to-5 job that I work at, so this is just like kind of just sharing stuff. Helpful if I get some extra dollars here and there for buying new books, for a new camera, that kind of stuff. That's always nice. But to pay for hosting for the website. But yeah, I mean, I'm not out here trying to become a YouTube rich and famous by any means. But thank you. Yeah, YouTube content definitely does make GMing feel more complicated, not less. I think personally the one that always gets me the most is that there's a lot of content creators now that are like, oh, this is about crafting the narrative of your game, and I'm like, you're giving people the like maybe opposite advice of what they need. It's like, remember, we're not trying to write a book. We're trying to manage a bunch of, well, idiots at the table trying to get through an adventure. A bunch of bumbling idiots, adventurers, trying to navigate their way through the world and become rich and famous in their own right, and so sort of like going after chasing their own goals and doing that sort of stuff and encouraging their type of play. It's not I'm not looking for advice. It's trying to turn my game table into the next Game of Thrones and expect that my players are going to inhabit those characters in all their seriousness and gravitas and all the drama of it. Like it's at the end of the day, it's still a game, guys. It's still a game. Yeah, they want to tell their character story, not be a pawn. Yeah. So it's a mix of character-driven and plot-driven storytelling together, and the experience of just having dice completely screw over one side of the screen, whichever side of the screen it's going to be, in that exact moment. But yeah, no, I think that's going to be everything for me, guys. Thank you for hanging out. We're going to do this again. We try to do this every week. I do have some travel coming up, but we'll get it all figured out. I don't think that's going to delay anything coming out, but just in case, keep that in mind. I do have to do some work travel, so I will be out of pocket for a little bit. But thanks for hanging out, guys, and I'll talk to you guys later, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye.